So with that introduction out of the way, let's actually go into the transfer and seizure of those FSMO roles. Now, one of the first things you should be aware of is the whole idea, as I said earlier, with the FSMO roles, is that there's only one of those in the domain, or in some cases in the forest. And so the transfer and or seizure of these roles are things that you generally don't do all that often. Occasionally you have need to transfer one into one location or the other because you know a domain controller will be going offline for an extended period of time. But for the most part, even just the regular reboot of your domain controllers is a short enough period of time to not actually have to do any of the work that we were about to. Now, the other thing that's important to know is that as we go through the transfer as opposed to the seizure, these are two very different activities. That the transfer is a graceful move of this role from one server to the other, whereas the seizure is a non-graceful move. The only time you would go through accomplishing a seizure is if, for some reason, your domain controller is completely dead, completely offline, and unable to be brought back online. Seizure is something you really never want to have to do, but it is possible so that you can essentially recreate the role onto a new surviving machine once you know that the previous host of that role is no longer available. Now back here on our server dc.company.pri, I want to show you the three different locations where you have to go, at least here in the graphical user interface, to do the transfer of a FSMO role. The very first place we'll have to look here is under Active Directory Users and Computers, where three of the FSMO roles are contained, or at least where the location to transfer them is contained. If we come here to the root, and then under All Tasks we choose Operations Manager, you can see here that for the RID, PDC, and infrastructure roles, this is the location where you would go about transferring. This is, again, the graceful move of that role from one domain controller to another. So if I hit the change button here, this is what would allow me to transfer it to the existing computer. So typically I would focus this console or bring it up on the machine where I wanted to transfer the role to. In our environment right now, we only have a single domain controller. So as you can see here, if I attempt to hit the change button, well, it says this is the current DC and also the current operations manager. There's nothing you can do. But this is the location for the first three of these where you would go about completing that transfer of the role. The ADUC is also joined by Active Directory Domains and Trusts over here, which is also known as the Active Directory console you probably use the least. Here in Domains and Trusts, if we come up here and look at Operations Manager, it's here where we can change the domain naming Operations Manager role. Essentially the very same dialog box here. Identify which machine, hit the change button, and then change it over to that new machine. Now for the last of these, number 5, the Schema Master role. We have to accomplish that from the Schema Master's console, which, if you've taken a look up here in our list of tools, is not one that's directly available right out of the box. This is done on purpose because Microsoft wants to make it a little bit difficult for you to even find the Schema Master console because of all the possibility for you clicking around in there and performing something horrible that corrupts your Active Directory database. In order to make available the Schema Master role, we have to do a couple of things first, not the least of which is to bring up an elevated command prompt here so that we can register the DLL that's associated with that Microsoft Management Console. If I just clear my screen here, I want to show you the command regsvr32, which is the tool we use to register a DLL. And then the DLL we want is schmmgmt.dll, I believe. And if we run that, that will actually register the Schema Management DLL. Once we've accomplished that, then we have to dig even further to try to locate where this silly console happens to be. Let me bring up the run box here and launch the MMC console because it's there where I can attach in the snap-in for the Active Directory schema right here. I'll choose Add and OK, and that will give me access again to the AD schema. It is my strong recommendation that you don't spend too much time plugging around in here because, again, it is far too easy for you to do something horrible to your Active Directory database from this console. But the one place where you would need to actually go and change the Schema Master role holder is right here under Operations Manager, where you again see that same dialog box for transferring the role from one domain controller to another. Now, if all these different locations for identifying where to do the transfer is just a little too complex for you, or if you need to do a seizure as opposed to a transfer, well, the only way to accomplish that actually happens not in any of these consoles. Instead, we have to go back to our old elevated command prompt again and run the tool called ntdsutil. Let me bring that back here and clear the screen so we can see ntdsutil. ntdsutil is the Swiss Army knife, as it were, for performing a variety of Active Directory management tasks. If you hit the question mark here, it'll show you the long list of tasks that you can do here. And in fact, in this module, and I believe even maybe a little bit in the next module, we've got a couple things that we'll be doing with NTDSUTL. The one that we're interested in for our purposes here is the roles command right here, which we can access by just typing roles. Now here into roles is where you can see we can go through that process of transferring any of the operations manager roles, or even seizing those roles as well. However, in order to do that, you have to first connect to the server where you should transfer the role to. And that's done by hitting Connections. Here under the Connections submenu, you would then need to connect to one of the servers. So connect to server DC, for example. Once you've done that, quit out. That takes you back to the FSMO maintenance submenu, where you would then go transfer and then whatever role you wanted to transfer, like the PDC role holder, for example. Now we don't need to do that here because that same server DC already holds the PDC role. But this is the process you would go through again to transfer or to seize any of these FSMO roles. Most important thing here is remember, the only time you want to go through a seizure is if you know that you have a non-recoverable domain controller. The seizure requires the complete rebuild, the reinitiation of all the things that that previous role holder did. And so it can create some issues sometimes. So it's always best to make sure you transfer that role out before you ever decommission a domain controller.